Well, good morning, everybody. It's a bit unsettling just to think back to a week ago today. We were watching the hurricane, which would have made landfall, a week ago last night into Florida. It was about this time in the morning, rolling through Georgia, coming into parts of North and South Carolina here. And that was about the only thing in town, right? The rest of the country was relatively quiet with respect to the weather pattern, and we were just paying attention to this upper level trough that had snuck in on this side, which was what was pulling the hurricane around, eventually taking into parts of the Mid-South. And just to think through this again, just on the sheer amount of water that has fallen during that time period. Now remember, this only captures the hurricane. Don't forget there were 3 or 4 days of rain that led up to it, and that's not in this map. But some of these totals are just staggering. And just continuing to monitor the situation this week and watch as the recovery efforts continue. This will definitely go down as one of our most devastating landfalling hurricanes in U.S. history, and certainly the name Helene will be retired. But just, to continue on to think about where this pattern is going and what's next coming into this area. Overall, the pattern's very dry, which means we will have favorable conditions to continue to clean things up. But as I understand it, it's going to take months and in some places possibly over a year just to fix roadways, to rebuild homes, to get people back to some sort of normalcy. So just a very sobering thought about what weather can do. Now, as I was watching the forecasts all week long, we've been predicting quite dry conditions, but there was this chance of getting some storms right here. Remember, we talked about it yesterday, right along the Iowa, Illinois, Missouri border. And we had some storms this morning. And to be honest with you, these really outperformed what I thought they could do. And it got some active lightning that just came over that part of western Illinois. And we're going to watch to see how these storms continue to move their way toward the south and east for a little while yet this morning. Let me just get a refresh here on the radar and blow it up once for you. This is kind of what we're looking at here. Let's go ahead and just stop this and get right to the very end of the animation. There's where our storms are, spreading across this northern part of Illinois. We have some storms that are down here along the Gulf Coast, and you can see some of the moisture entering this corner of Washington. But overall, much of the rest of the country continues to be on the very dry side of things, and we do see this risk of a widespread wind event that's taking shape today and tomorrow. So we have the very cold morning temperatures across the northern tier of the U.S., parts of North Dakota, the Red River Valley, most of northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, where those temperatures are bottoming out early this morning. We did have the risk getting into parts of Nebraska and South Dakota as well, with some pretty chilly temperatures this morning, touching freezing. But on the back side of this, we're watching a wind event develop today and tomorrow, mainly tomorrow, that's going to be driving very strong winds throughout, everywhere from parts of the Great Basin into parts of the Pacific Northwest, including the Columbia Basin here, through the Snake River Valley, all throughout parts of Wyoming, where we have red flag warning, and in through Montana, where there are high wind watches and warnings in place. And we're going to take a close look at those winds in just a few moments, but I wanted to show you, this is what things are going to look like tomorrow. So if we just kind of take a quick look in here. Another powerful front comes through. This one had been pretty well forecast by the models. Another huge push of dry air behind this. And we're going to see a switchover. So you're going to start off with a southerly wind that's going to quickly, behind this front, flip over to westerly. And these wind speeds are going to be quite fierce. If we just take a look at the forecast of those winds, we're looking somewhere here. Watch, this builds out today. So this is throughout today. So we're going to be seeing, again, throughout parts of everywhere on this side of the Sierra, through Nevada, parts of Oregon, Idaho, Montana. We'll be getting these wind gusts that'll be in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range, which will likely be closer to 60 to 70 as they normally are, coming right off of the highest peaks and through this area. So that's through tonight. And then if you watch on Saturday, this spreads across the rest of the northern tier of the United States, where we could be getting some of these strong winds, 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts in eastern Montana, North Dakota, southern Saskatchewan, and Manitoba as well. And we could get some of the stronger winds all the way over the Great Lakes too. That's just through Sunday evening. Now what we'll be watching after that will be something that comes out of the Caribbean, out of the Caribbean and eventually into the Gulf. And we've been keeping an eye on this all week, knowing that there were limited chances for whatever this is to become a strong tropical system, but it is still something that we have got to continue to talk about because of the major flooding threat of the surge of moisture going through there. So again, big story for the remainder of this weekend is just going to be the wind event that takes shape here across the northern tier of the U.S., southern part of Canada, and then what comes out of the Gulf of Mexico here. So the latest update from the National Hurricane Center, it's kind of following the story we've had all week, which is Bermuda High is tucked way over here. So Leslie and Kirk, which by the way, Kirk, powerful hurricane right now at Cat 4, they're just going to curl around, sending the remnants of this toward Europe. And the National Hurricane Center stuck with about a 40% chance of this developing into a tropical depression or a named system, and maybe tropical storm strength. And if you just look at the tracks being forecast by the European model, we're just looking for where they cluster together, right? So we see something coming out of the Bay of Campeche. This was born really in this part of the Caribbean, came over the Yucatan. But most of the guidance now, because of the presence of a very large ridge of high pressure in the midsection of the country and that front that's diving ahead of it, are taking this system into parts of southern Florida. And the concern there is that that is where the heaviest rains are likely going to be over the next 7 days. So we know that there will be systems entering British Columbia. We've talked about ones that come over the top and redevelop in New England. We saw the storms that were forecast here this morning. We'll take a little bit closer look at that on the high-res models. We do know we have another frontal boundary coming through the upper Midwest that will get here over into the Northeast, but most of the country will see zeros over this next week. But if we take a closer look down here into Florida, we do notice that there's the potential from the WPC of widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain here. And as that approaches the coastline, there will likely be a few places in central Florida and southern Florida that do pick up 6 to 10 inches of rain as this comes through. So again, that's the latest I've got from the WPC, and it feels like it's pretty good guidance overall on the precipitation threat. We'll take a closer look with the ensembles in just a few minutes. But our main story throughout this week has been this, right? I just want to give you the latest update. Until this trough, this one here, is able to reposition itself over the southwest, this ridge will dominate. It'll come back repeatedly, and it's going to keep much of the country very dry. This pattern is amplified, and it's kind of locked up. It's been kind of locked up like this for a while. Bermuda high sitting here, large central U.S. high sitting there. There's this western Russia ridge, and the troughs that have been in place have all been kind of just responding to where those high pressure cells have been. And there's no good motion either west, which would be retrograding, or east, which would be a forward progressing storm system set up in this pattern. And that's why much of the next 10 to maybe 12, 15 days seems to be behaving similarly to what you see here. And all of our models continue to show that. So this is the forecast for precipitation anomalies through the next 14 days from the European model. It's the same story. The focus is here as the systems come in. The ridge sends everything over the top. We could get some reformation in parts of the Northeast or into the Canadian Maritimes, and the tropical system sneaks here while the Bermuda high sends Leslie and Kirk around its western periphery, just like you see over there on the right-hand side of the image. That same forecast is echoed by the GFS too. So this is, again, the European and the GFS, a lot of similarities in their 14-day predictions. Now, we do have stuff, of course, going on right now, so let's kind of get a quick look at this. Good model initialization this morning. So we did have the storms here. We talked about what was going on along the Gulf Coast and that. So I like the way the NAM was initialized. So just playing this through the rest of the day on Friday, that front leaves, kind of goes through this area but doesn't have enough to work with, no moisture to continue to build storms in this region today. So what you saw coming through northern Illinois will likely be the greatest extent of what kind of rain we can get out of this. Storms along the Gulf Coast, though. We have the frontal boundary coming into the northwest, so keep a close eye on this as well. And as we play it forward, that system rolls right through the Canadian Prairie, dipping a front into this part of Montana. And this is the front behind which, so this is where it'll be by Saturday at 4 o'clock. So how quick that moved. Then we're going to get the very strong westerly winds on the backside. So southerly winds here, westerly winds quickly on the backside of this, and that's where we see those wind gusts on the westerlies here, getting up 40, 50, 60 miles an hour possibly. This is now through Saturday afternoon and evening. The front clears through the Great Lakes by the time we get into the early morning hours on Sunday, and then that's where we land by Sunday afternoon. And that's when the beginning of the heaviest rains start to move their way toward Florida. So just thinking of this all through, I'm going to show you the high-res European model just to kind of give us a sense of what happens beyond that. So let's play this through. Here we are. There's that system, tropical system, fronts going into British Columbia. Here we go. So this is the very tight pressure gradient around that low on Saturday, switching the winds around. There's the chances for rain in the upper Midwest, Great Lakes states, Saturday night into Sunday as the front comes through. And then here you can see the front getting to parts of the Northeast. But these rainfall totals are light. Don't let the color shading, which is just denoting precipitation type and intensity, but it's not giving us a whole lot of information. When I designed this color bar, I just wanted to see where the models were producing rain, not necessarily infer, you're going to get heavier rain when you're in this color. Okay, that's what I did when I made this color bar. So as we play through, the weekend, now you start to see those heavy rains coming through parts of southern Florida next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And that's about it. There's just not a whole lot in this pattern because of that high pressure cell all the way out through the next 10 days. And we have questions if this can break down after that. And we talked about it yesterday. There is a scenario where once you get out there to mid-October, we start to build lows closer to the west coast. And if they start to get into this area, you tap into the Gulf, we open things up, and it starts to look a bit wetter. But I'm putting a lot of hope in that pattern, and I have yet to see the models just fully anchor into it. So the result is that over the next 10 days, everywhere that you see in that deepest shade of red represents locations where we expect to stay under a ½ inch of total accumulated precipitation. Now, this was the 0Z model run, which didn't fully capture the rain that was coming through northern Illinois, and it's a 51 model blend. So it's kind of giving you a broad brush stroke on what's going on. And if you're curious who's going to be really dry, that's the chance of staying under 1/10 of an inch. On the wetter side of it, here's 1 inch. And outside of what's hitting this part of Washington, the systems that are coming through here and kind of curling up into the northeast, and then down in Florida, which the rainfall totals down there could be immense. Chance of getting over 4 inches, very high in this area. That's about it. That's about the only places we're able to kind of pull some moisture out of the atmosphere and get it to the ground. So what about week 2? The models all kind of lined up, show the same story. And what we're waiting on is we're just waiting to see if late in the week 2 time period, if we can get something that kind of starts to develop troughs off the California coast. Because what that'll do is that'll set an expiration date on the really dry conditions that the Midwest, Mid-South, this part of where the Missouri, the Mississippi, and the Ohio come together. That'll shift over quickly in the second half of this month if we break down the presence of the ridge, which is right here, anchored in the Southwest right now. So that's what we're on the lookout to see if it's going to break down. So from there, let's talk about the temperatures, and let's get into this long-range discussion I kind of promised you from yesterday. And this was our prediction for frost over the next 7 days, and a lot of this is happening right now. If we just take a close look at those minimum temperatures, here they are this morning. So very warm in the southeast, but very cold behind the front, the first of 2 fronts in this area. So then here is Saturday, major warm-up ahead of the big wind event, and there's the cool down immediately behind it on Sunday. See that? So that's Sunday's minimum temperatures. Here's Monday, cool one for the Midwest. Tuesday, cool one for parts of the Ohio Valley. Wednesday, this gets into the east and southeast. And here's next Thursday, where it's still staying quite cool in parts of the southeast with lows maybe dipping into the 40s down here. Okay, high temperatures. This is today's highs. This is for Friday. The back and forth on these temperatures is incredible. So remember, on Saturday, that frontal boundary will be right about here, midday. So the strong westerlies on the backside dropping the temperatures off, but there's going to be strong southerlies with very dry air out ahead of this. And you just notice from the panhandles all the way up into parts of southern Minnesota, 80s and 90s are forecast on those strong, strong winds. This is how things shape up on Sunday, though. Clears it out, drops the temperatures 20 plus degrees. By Monday, it just rebuilds again. That's where the ridge keeps coming back, and that's why we see the heat in this area. So early next week, the East Coast, the whole of it, gets a nice cool start, and that's Wednesday and Thursday. So it's going to last through most of the week while the West and the center part of the United States make a huge rebound. And I know you can imagine what these maps are going to look like. Day 5 through 10, have we really changed this pattern? I've drawn that I don't know how many times, but that's the way things look out there all the way to the middle of the month. So given that we don't have a lot of new evidence that this pattern is just going to fully break down at any point during the next 10 to 15 days, we have to just assess and step back and say, what are the implications if it doesn't? And I want to show you what I'm concerned about. First of all, the average temperature rank since the beginning of September, well, there's a lot of ones on this. Where are they? They're in Florida. They're in the Southwest, which has been just scorching hot for most of the summer. I mean, I understand it is a desert, but we've gotten, in terms of our ranks, it's been quite hot down here. And then you see across the northern tier of the United States. While we've had frost events, we just saw one, right, come through this morning. It's the immediate rebound. No long duration cold has been able to set up. And the opening up of these ridges just keeps this area hot. But it's the precipitation side of it that's really guiding my longer range concerns. And the reality is that from September 1 through yesterday, we've got huge areas of our central plains from Oklahoma and Kansas up to Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa, parts of Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, this very large area that's been dry. We've been very dry in the Southwest. No hint of an early start to any sort of flow, in this new water year, which of course just began on October 1. We've even been dry in parts of the Northwest. Now, we don't expect that to hang on very long, but this is the thing I'm concerned about. The Southeast has all been dominated by 3 tropical systems: Francine, potential tropical cyclone 8, which hit North Carolina, and then, of course, the flooding that we had from Helene. But take a look at the Northeast. Very, very dry here as well. And we've been watching this, but that soil moisture or the lack of soil moisture that's been throughout the Missouri Basin, the Mississippi Basin, and parts of the Great Lakes Basin is just one that we don't often find that fall brings in enough wet weather on a consistent basis to undo this. And we balance out this risk of being dry, which is great for harvest and letting a crop dry down in the fields, against the longer-term drought implications of dry falls not being corrected by wet early winters. And then you get into midwinter, and this all freezes, which means any moisture that's in this is locked up, and if there's none, then you lock nothing. And you put snow on top of it during the winter and hope that the spring melt is enough to recover some of this soil moisture, which puts a lot of hope on late season snowpack in the next spring's rains. What I am surprised about is that given how dry it's been, look at these ranks again, that we've not seen more of a change in the drought monitor in that area. We just have abnormally dry, or the first stage of drought, a couple of areas with the second stage of drought, D2, but I would have expected this to show much, much greater change in the drought scenario. Now, that is not a criticism of the people that make this graphic. Those are brilliant scientists, and they have their reasons. Remember that state climatologists, several meteorologists that are part of the group that makes a drought monitor provide suggestions, and I'm never one to go over the top of those guys. I just am looking at it going, man, that's a really dry 33-day time period, and I would have expected a bit more. I'm sure it'll change with time, but I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there, just as another way to look at it. But our newest drought monitor released yesterday does show a substantial portion of the United States, better than 70%, in some form of drought. And then we look at the long-range forecasts, and from now through most of the rest of October, we don't see a whole lot of reason to break this pattern on, at least through the front half of this month, right? There are some indications that once you get past the middle of the month, maybe the third week beyond, we just dip troughs farther into the West Coast, and that will change everything. And the European model is trying to sniff that out. So this is, when I grab this slider bar, it's a 30-day sliding window. So this is, to November the 2nd. Now, if I just slide it forward, what we're doing is we're dropping off one day on the tail end and adding one on the far end. And as you get out there toward the middle of November, so this would be like October 19th through November 18th, you notice that the model kind of got rid of that big dry signal. And the only way by which we can expect that to happen is if we drop the heights, drop in troughs, bring in cooler and wetter weather into the west. And remember that historically, whenever I looked back at every La Niña event, the majority of them, Octobers and Novembers, did not look like one another. It wasn't all, but most of them didn't. So there's nothing in this that's got me surprised. But I'm putting a lot of weight on the rains returning post-harvest, if you've got your harvest done, to recover that soil moisture. And I'm putting a lot of weight on it because I'm concerned about a few things. We've been watching this evolution of a La Niña event, and it's been bumbling along there. We looked yesterday and saw the trade winds are expected to rebound again. But overall, how strong is this going to be? By most, forecasts, it's something like this. Look at the ensemble average from the NMME. It's down here about 1 degree C below normal, and maintaining that through winter. Where is it now? It's about right here. It's almost to it. So will the trade winds continue to respond? That's the question. Because here's the big idea. When you think about what a La Niña does, the trade winds take a lot of the global momentum. And because it's conserved, what ends up happening is the westerlies, both in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, they slow down, or they become more variable. And one thing that happens is we lose the typical drive of the tropical momentum and moisture out of this region that pushes what's called the subtropical jet into California, which runs across the southern tier of the United States and exits. And then the polar jet just tends to be more variable. So now this L represents now, but later in winter, we just tend to ridge out here, drop troughs in very weakly that come out like this. But the flow tends to be weak. And why does that matter? When the flow is fast, you just kind of split North America. You keep the cold way up north. You bring a lot of warmth in from the south that will get all the way almost up to the Canadian border. And all of the coldest air is just kept up in the Canadian archipelago. And so systems just go. And they don't have enough time to let the jet stream become really amplified. But what does an amplified jet stream do? It slows down weather systems. It allows for much, much, much colder air to come dropping in behind them when they do form. And they are allowed to occlude and spin up, which means they produce more snow on the northern side. They tend to enter the Pacific Northwest, come through the Ohio Valley, and leave. That's what a typical La Niña, if we get down here, would kind of steer the atmosphere toward. Now, I say that because you have to remember, when I tell you about a seasonal forecast, which this is a correlation for a seasonal forecast, and we use something like La Niña, that's just base state of the atmosphere. There are only two things that we use that consistently give us an idea about seasonal forecasts. The first is the ocean temperatures. That's why we look at it all the time. Why? The thermal inertia of water is 5 times greater than land. So the ocean temperatures tend to change in response to consistent atmospheric behavior. And that gives us just a clue as to what that consistent atmospheric behavior is. The other thing that we can use subseasonally to seasonally to predict the weather is soil moisture. It's an indication of the evapotranspiration, the moisture coming out of the ground back into the lower atmosphere. And if it doesn't change, that's an indication that the precipitation patterns are avoiding areas. And we want to know if that's going to continue. But that's it. Those are our only two real seasonal predictors. So this is where my concern comes in. Right now, this is very dry. And we have got a La Niña brewing. And we know that our models mimic the historical correlations. And this is it. I've showed you this 4 or 5 times now, but look at it again. You say, Eric, if it's November to March and there's a La Niña, what do we get? I wrote it down. Better chances of cold air outbreaks. That does not mean every day of winter is cold. Colder than average. It just means that there's better chances of a variable jet stream driving Arctic outbreaks. And there's better chances of staying mild to the south. We tend to have a jet stream that enters in the northwest and leaves the Ohio River Valley. And what I don't like is this. Those years when we have La Niña tend to, during the winter months, not return a ton of moisture to this area. I just said tend to. Doesn't mean they don't. They just tend to not. And we tend to stay drier across the southern tier of the United States from California all the way to the southeast. These years tend to do great with snowpack in the northwest, tend to do great with moisture recovery in the Great Lakes, the Ohio River Valley, the northeast. But that's just the tendency. And the reason that I show you this is because every long-range model, have a look. This is one I annotated when the new European model came out a month ago. I'll get new data from this tomorrow, which means we'll talk about that on Monday. This is what it looked like for October, November, December on the left, and then December, January, February on the right. This is what the NMME came out mid-month. October, November, December on the left, December, January, February on the right. You see it? Can you see it? They look exactly the same for where the precipitation patterns are setting up. This is from our government, the CPC's official forecast. October, November, December left, January, February, March on the right. Again, fall and winter. And that's the same story. And every one of these models is very much aligned with the historical numbers. So what I'm curious about here is, do we actually get a good winter out of this across a big section of the country? A lot of cold air penetrating at times. And some of the forecast models are like, sure, it's got it in here. But why I don't like this is because the following years after a La Niña winter tend to increase dry risk, okay? Not I didn't say drought, but just tend to increase dry risks in those areas that are currently dry. So I am saying, wow, maybe November rains come through and help, or early December rain and maybe some snow comes through and helps this area. But generally speaking, we've got a correlation. It's not strong, 0.2 to 0.4. But behind a La Niña, we just tend to be drier. So I looked at that and I said, well, let's also go pull out exact years. Now, we got to be careful with this analysis. It's precipitation rate. It's not total precipitation, but it's an indication of that. And there's some heavy hitters in here. 76 is in there. 2012 is in here. 2011 is in here. And so these years are years following La Niña events. And given that there is already dry soils in this area, and knowing that historically, when you look at the next year after a La Niña, May to August, we have, there is a drier bias. It just has me worried about 2025 and July particularly. So listen, I'm only telling you this. If you're a Midwestern farmer, Great Plains farmer, I'm only telling you this because I'm wanting you to know that I'm thinking it through. And I'm also wanting you to know that this is still 9 months away. And we're just starting to build a narrative. I'm not losing any sleep over this, and you shouldn't either. I just want you to know that historically, these are the kind of things that happen, and we start to do, as Matt said, he had a great phrase, right? We're just checking off boxes. We're looking at things, trying to make some sort of sense of it. Now, you can also go out and find any model run you want to kind of predict that. For example, do you know the Canadian model, CanSIPs, goes all the way out to May, June, and July already. And it looks exactly like those historical time periods, doesn't it? You can see much wetter here and here, and then drier like that. And just come back to it. See, wetter here and here, drier like that. So that's how the models are going to respond. Even our government's model. Let's go have a look at it. Let's go June, July, August 2025. They've got wet here, wet, wetter, and drier. See that? So I just want to let you know that I think there's a few things to think through here, and we need to just be aware that there are drought risks going forward. But sub-seasonally, I want you to think about the West Coast for a moment. I could be predicting, in fact, we did, right? Let's go back to it here somewhere. Yeah, we tend to be very dry in California when there's a La Niña. That just tends to happen. It could, for 2 weeks in January, energize the subtropical jet. It targets the Sierra Nevada, and the Sierra Nevada mountains could get their entire winter's worth of snowfall in 2 weeks, even in the middle of a La Niña. And then we could have big storm systems that just break down the pattern, dig right into Kansas. They come out of Colorado, they develop in Kansas, they draw the moisture, and we just put a foot of snow down. All of that can happen. And so there's nothing. If you think that I am certain about this, I'm just going to be honest with you. If I was certain about it, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but I wouldn't tell you. If I was certain about this, I wouldn't even be in my house right now. I'd be up the Chicago Board of Trade, and I'd be a very, very wealthy man. But here I am sitting in my pajamas in my basement talking to a wall about the weather. So I just want to be clear that if you think that I'm certain about where I think this is going to go, you're mishearing me. I'm just giving you some options to think through. Okay, I think I've labored on about that enough. Let's get down to some other things here, like South America. This is the newest 14-day forecast of precipitation anomalies. We're getting some better hints that the monsoonal moisture is starting to come in. We talked about it all week long. This is the new update for the 10-day European model. It's wetter, so is the GFS, which means I think when we get those new updates today, they'll come out from Mato Grosso, we'll start to see a little bit of an uptick in planting simply because these forecast rains have come through, and they're going to probably go out and put some seed down knowing that the rains are likely going to come through. But I think it's really going to start to push things forward. And if we just look at one last thing here, let's go to Weather Bell real quick and open up their maps, the weeklies. I'm going to go to South America, precipitation 30-day. I just want to show you their newest update through mid-November is looking quite wet. And again, there's some initialization bias in this, but just want to give you the latest we've got from this model. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Have a good weekend, and I'll let these thoughts evolve, and we'll just continue to forecast next week. Thanks.